Welcome to the third season of Trace Talks. We still have a few minutes. We sold the shuttle doesn't get into 3:10, so we still have about 5 minutes. I just want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Jackie and Chuck for their hard work on this presentation. They really did a lot of work on it. I'd like to, I'd also like to acknowledge the upcoming presentation. Luella Rausch, sitting over there on the left, is going to be talking about Days for Girls. This is something I'd never heard about. And
what days?
Days for Girls. It's about reusable menstrual health products for girls in third world countries, which could also include some of the areas in the United States. It's pretty amazing. And then coming up in March, we have a variation on the 3 tenors. It's actually the 4 photographers. And so the Philip W. Whitey and Philip T. Tan and Janet Tan and Tom Brotherton are going to share us a really neat presentation. Meet your other neighbors, the critters of E.T. This is great, and yeah, we got some great pictures from Anthony and Cleopatra. And I'm trying to work out something in April for a lady named Angelica Hansen. She's with the Texas State Medicare Patrol, and it's about the top scams of 2025. I heard her lecture, and it was really fabulous and so informative. Plus, she's a fun speaker. So, but anyone else, there's still May through the rest of the year. So, and anybody who wants to talk, we'll help you out with slides and everything. And we've got a lot of prior members here who gave talks, including Stuart.
People like to talk. People like to talk.
Yeah.
And talk.
So it looks like we're just a few minutes here, but everyone knows Jackie, and we all love her Parisian purr when she talks. And it'll be a most entertaining presentation. I learned a whole bunch about Joan of Arc that I didn't know about. So I'm sure you'll find it so enjoyable. So I'll let you take it away, Chuck and Jackie.
First of all, I would like to thank Frankie for working so hard on my behalf. And I also would like to thank Jacque for being the biggest ally a girl could ever have. Anything that I need, he will help with. I'm blessed. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. As many of you know, I was born in France, and I've always had a deep love for French history. Since moving to Texas as a young bride, my heart has remained in 2 places, but stories of home have always kept me grounded. Today, I want to share the story of someone who has inspired me all my life, Joan of Arc, or Jeanne d'Arc, as we say in French. She was a simple peasant girl who rose to become a national heroine and a saint. My goal is to bring her to life for you, not just as a historical figure, but as a real person with faith, courage, and a burning purpose. Please relax and imagine yourself in 15th century France as we follow Joan's incredible journey. Let's start at the beginning. In 1412, Joan was born in Domremy, a small village in northeastern France. Domremy is 36 miles from Nancy, where I was born, and 230 miles from Paris, due east. Imagine rolling fields, simple stone cottages, and the smell of wood smoke in the air. This is the actual house where Joan was born. Life in Domremy was quiet, and most people were poor. Joan's family were farmers, hardworking and devout. Her father, Jacque Bertrand, was not a simple farmer. He oversaw the guard and collected taxes for the entire village, and he also owned 40 acres of land. As a child, Joan would have helped tend sheep, milk cows, and spin wool. There was little time for leisure. Life was about survival, working the land, attending the church, and staying close to family. But France itself was anything but peaceful. The 100 Years' War had brought devastation to the land. As you can see on the map, all of northern France, all the pink part of the map, was occupied by England. The southern part of the map was France and her allies. And by the way, one of our allies was Scotland. The hot pink part was the Duchy of Burgundy. Burgundy in the past had always been an ally of the King of France. But because of relationship and marriages, and because the Burgundians were beginning to think that France was going to be defeated, they decided that they better stick with England. So anyway, there is the map. And you can see the yellow circle, the little town of Domremy. And it's right on the border between the Burgundian and the English, which made life in a particular village particularly dangerous. So the English forces occupied northern France, and the Burgundian, allied to the English, occupied eastern France. The French crown was weakened, and the countryside was ravaged by raids. Joan grew up surrounded by fear, instability, and war. Henry VI of England, allied to Philip III of Burgundy, wanted to conquer the west of France. To understand Joan's story, we must understand France's struggle at the time. The 100 Years' War had brought the country to its knees. The English occupied vast territory, including Paris, and supported a rival claimant to the French throne. The rightful heir, the Dauphin Charles, was weak and still uncrowned. France was a fractured, desperate nation. The people were starving for a miracle, and that is what Joan believed she was sent to deliver. Joan as a young girl. Here's where we must imagine Joan as she was. A girl of maybe 12 or 13, small in stature, quiet but strong-willed. She was known for her piety. She prayed constantly, went to Mass, and confessed often. Even as a child, Joan had a seriousness about her. But Joan was also practical. She knew how to work hard and how to endure discomfort. She also knew how to remain steadfast in her faith and consequently refuse offers of marriages. I imagine her standing in a field, looking up at the sky, already wondering what purpose God had for her. At around 13, Joan began to hear what she described as voices. She said they belong to Saint Michael, the warrior archangel, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and St. Margaret. These voices gave her a mission: save France, crown Charles VII at Reims, and drive out the English. As you see in the above painting, the saints are urging her on. Va, va, fille de Dieu. Go, go, daughter of God. Can you imagine a peasant girl, illiterate, with no military training, hearing such a call? At first, she resisted. She kept the voices secret, but they grew louder and more insistent. Eventually, Joan said, "I'm not afraid, for God is with me." By the time Joan was 17, she knew what she had to do. She had to meet the Dauphin Charles in his court in Chinon. In order to that, she had to request permission to travel to Chinon from the Sire de Baudricourt, who live in Vaucouleurs, some 20 miles from Domremy. The first time she went to see the Sire de Baudricourt, she traveled with her uncle. Baudricourt told her uncle to tell Joan's father to give her a sound beating for wasting his time. But Joan kept going back. Baudricourt had doubts about her ability to accomplish her goal, but in the end, he gave in and granted permission as well as support. She was given an armor and an escort. When the Duke of Lorraine, Charles II, heard about Joan, he demanded that she come to him in Nancy to talk to him about her quest. He was suffering from gout and thought she might also be of help. She told him that she could not help him, but that he ought not to live openly with his mistress. Impressed by her boldness, he gave her a beautiful white horse and sent her on her way. So Joan traveled through enemy territory from Vaucouleurs to Chinon, a 340-mile journey in winter. During that journey, she cut off her hair and wore men's clothing for the first time. When she arrived in Chinon, where Dauphin Charles had his court, Joan claimed God had sent her. And she passed a test set up by Charles, recognizing Charles even though he was disguised among his courtiers. Joan told him that God had chosen him to lead France. Charles, who was skeptical, was intrigued. He decided to give her a chance. Shortly after her meeting with Charles, Joan faced her first great test at the Siege of Orleans in 1429. The city was under English control, and the French forces were laying siege to Orleans to remove the English, and they were losing ground and close to giving up. Joan arrived in shining armor, carrying a banner with Jesus and the fleur-de-lis. Her presence inspired the soldiers. During one of the battles, Joan was struck by an arrow in her shoulder. She was badly wounded, and the French troop morale started to crumble. They were ready to retreat. You have to understand that this has been such a hard war with no winning, no success, and they were easily discouraged. But Joan refused to give up. She pulled the arrow out herself, rallied the troops, climbed back into the fight. Her courage was infectious, and the soldier charged forward, Against all odds, she won. Orléans was free, and Joan became a hero. After every battle, Joan took care of the wounded, not only the French, but the enemy wounded, the English and the Burgundians. She also dictated letters, especially to the Duke of Burgundy, begging him to come back to the French crown. With Orléans liberated, Joan urged Charles to be crowned. She led him to Reims. You can see the beautiful Gothic cathedral there, where French kings were traditionally crowned. In July 1429, Charles VII was anointed king. Joan knelt beside him, tears in her eyes, and said, "Now the will of God has been accomplished." During this time, Joan referred to herself as Jeanne la Pucelle, meaning Jeanne the Maid or the Virgin. It was a title of humility, but also strength, one that showed her complete devotion to her mission. Joan then tried to deliver Paris, still under English control. This time, however, she failed and was wounded in the process. Despite the setback, Charles VII rewarded Joan's service. He ennobled her family, granting them the surname de Lys, meaning of the lily, the fleur de lys of the French flag. A title of nobility. This is a big deal. Her family was elevated from being peasants to being aristocracy. The people of Domremy were exempted from taxes for the next 300 years. In 1430, Joan was sent to defend Compiègne, which is in Normandy. During a skirmish, she was thrown from her horse and captured by the Burgundian allies of the English. Joan was betrayed, left outside the gates of the city while her forces retreated. The Burgundians sold her to the English for a large sum, and the English put her on trial. The trial was overseen by French Bishop Pierre Cochon, a man loyal to the English. He accused Joan of heresy for claiming to hear voices and witchcraft for wearing men's clothes, which she had done for protection on the battlefield. The trial was a mockery of justice. Yet Joan, though uneducated, answered with sharpness and unwavering faith. When asked if she believed she was in God's grace, she famously replied, "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there." The trial records are still in the church archives in Rouen. On May 30th, 1431, Joan was burned at the stake in Rouen. She was just 19 years old. Her final word was Jesus. The crowd, many of whom admire her, wept as they watched. Even one of her executioners said, "We have burned a saint." However, by the end of the reign of Charles VII, 22 years later, the English were completely out of France. All territory lost had been regained except for Calais, and peace reigned once again between the two countries. This was the end of the 100-Year War. In 1456, after Joan's mother Isabel and her brothers petitioned the Pope Calixtus III and the king to clear Joan's name, a retrial of theologians and clergymen was held to investigate. The original trial was judged to be invalid due to improper procedure deceit, and fraud, and the charges against Joan were nullified. Now I want to share a curious little history with you, a bit of mystery that arose about 5 years after Joan's death. In the mid-1430, a woman appeared in France claiming to be Joan of Arc herself. Imagine the whisper that must have spread. Could it really be her? This woman, whose name was said to be Claude des Armoises, but she called herself Jeanne des Armoises, had an uncanny resemblance to Joan. She even knew detail about Joan's life that few others could have known. This Joan, quote unquote, convinced many people, including some of Joan's own brother, who publicly supported her. It said they traveled with her as she moved through towns, sometimes honored like the true Maid of Orleans. People wanted to believe, perhaps because they missed Joan, or perhaps because the idea of her survival was too irresistible to dismiss. However, the woman was eventually exposed as an impostor. Though questions lingered. Was she a fraud seeking fame, or was there something more to her story? We'll never know for certain, but it's an intriguing wrinkle in Joan's legacy, a reminder of the lasting power she held over France and its people. Even after her death, Joan's presence remained so strong that for a time, someone else tried to carry her torch. It's just one more example of how unforgettable she truly was. Tucked away in the picturesque Lorraine countryside lies the castle of Joigny, a 12th century chateau steeped in fascinating lore and mystique. This historical site has a unique connection to Joan of Arc, or rather to the woman who claimed to be her, Jeanne des Armoises. As I mentioned previously, following Joan of Arc's death, Jeanne des Armoises emerged, claiming she had survived the fire. When her subterfuge unraveled, Jeanne settled into a quieter life and married Robert des Armoises, residing at this very castle in Joigny, where her legacy still lingers today. Her descendants still claim that Joan of Arc was her ancestor. Today, the castle is a comfortable bed and breakfast. On May 16, 1920, the Catholic Church and Pope Benedict XV canonized Joan of Arc as Saint Joan of Arc. Her feast day in France is May 30th, the day she was born, burned. I have a final story to add. This took place some 40 years ago. My parents had a very good friend named Georges Girardin. He was a lawyer and a judge and an amateur archaeologist. George loved to roam the woods around his village, not far from Domremy, in an area called the Parc Régional de Lorraine. This was formerly the hunting ground of the Dukes of Lorraine and is an enormous area of 510,000 acres. For comparison, the King Ranch is 825 acres, and the state of Rhode Island is 77,000 acres. In this immense park, one could find remains of the Roman road between Rome and Germany, ruins of Roman villas, remains of lost villages, etc. One day, George, on one of his walks, got lost in a very heavily wooded area and found an abandoned chapel. Inside the chapel was an altar and a stone marker saying, "Here lies Joan of Arc." He was shocked by his discovery. When he returned home, George called his best friend, Eugene Tisserand, who was a highly placed Catholic cardinal in Rome, Cardinal Eugene Tisserand. George related to the cardinal what he had found. There was silence on the other end. Then his friend Eugene told him, George, when I die, you will receive my file on Joan of Arc, but I can't talk about it now. But when the cardinal died and nothing came, George called Rome to inquire. He was told that the cardinal did not leave anything for him. George decided to drop the subject. However, he did return for another visit to the chapel in the woods. To his surprise, the stone with the inscription was no longer there. I was listening when George told this story to my parents. Could the grave really have been a relative of Joan? If so, why remove the stone? In my opinion, the church probably did not want to provide any explanation. A good friend, hearing the story of the chapel in the forest, said that in her opinion, the chapel and the gravestone were a way to acknowledge Joan's sacrifice. Since Joan's ashes had been thrown in the Seine River, there was no place to mourn her. So someone in her family or an admirer built the chapel so he or she could pray to her and acknowledge her. Joan is revered in Lorraine. All the villages either have a statue of her in a church or in the middle of the central square. I was reminded as a child that I needed to be as brave and courageous as Joan. When your country is invaded by foreign troops every 20 years, you warn your children of the dangers of war. After the War of 1870, when France lost Alsace and Lorraine to Germany, Joan of Arc became a symbol of resistance. General Charles de Gaulle invoked the courage of Joan during World War II to rally the French people. The Cross of Lorraine, which I wear, became the symbol of the French resistance. French women in the resistance always wore a Joan of Arc medal as protection. Today, Joan of Arc is venerated as a patron saint of soldiers and France. In closing, perhaps you will agree that Joan's story teaches us the power of purpose, faith, and courage. She was a warrior, a saint, and a leader who never gave up. A 15th century model for 21st century women. We were able to discover Joan's family tree. She had one sister and two brothers. And so she still has descendants. And every year in May, one of Joan's descendants gets to lead the parade. It's a reenactment of the entry into Orléans for the victory of Joan in Orléans. And I think it's a wonderful idea.
Show the slide, Chuck. Show the slide.
Yeah, her name is Clotilde. And last year she led the parade in Orléans. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
dictate letters, so she didn't read, but she knew.
She couldn't read or write, but she found that she could communicate if she dictated letter to a scribe who sent those letters. She had quite a correspondence with the Duke of Burgundy, and she also begged the King of England to not attack France.
Tell her to use the mic, will you?
So
Oh, use the mic. They can't hear you. Yeah.
she also begged the King of England to stop his attack on France. You know, was not a good thing to do. God didn't want it, quote unquote.
Do we have any of those letters? Are they saved?
I think that some of them still exist, but I couldn't
Yeah.
find. I looked, but couldn't find anything.
I'd like to ask about the pin that you have on.
Yes.
It's very interesting.
Oh, that. Scottish. For the Allies. Well, actually, it's quite interesting. You see, the flower of Scotland is a thistle, all right? And on that pen, there is a thistle. Well, the thistle was brought to Scotland by the mother of Mary, Queen of Scots, who was a Lorraine princess.
Ah.
And they have the same motto, both in Lorraine and in Scotland, which apparently was borrowed. And the Scots have always been the friends of the French. Since about 1200, they have had a mutual help treaty that if the French were in trouble, the Scots would help. And the French helped the Scots. In fact, they helped them big time after the big battle of Culloden, when they were chased away to all over the earth. A lot of them went to France to rebuild their lives.
How often do you go back to France? You have
Once a
family
year.
there? Once a year. Your family there still? You have family there still?
I do.
Yeah.
I have nephews and nieces.
There was one photograph, scene there where the family friend George, and there was a lady next to him.
That's me.
Oh, well,
Oh, what an eye!
beautiful.
I took the picture.
That was 40 years ago.
What I thought.
And between us is the good King Henry IV of France.
Okay.
And Henry came somewhat after the Joan of Arc era. And he was a king who said that he wanted French people to put a chicken in every pot every Sunday. And he also said that Paris was well worth a math because he was Protestant. And he married a French princess, so he had to become Catholic.
Where was the picture taken?
This one? In our friend's home.
That is in George's office, isn't it?
No, it's his home
His home.
in Messin.
And why is the Duke of Lorraine, why is he such an important figure and has all that massive king ranch? Was he involved in the Crusades?
Who?
The Duke of Lorraine, Laurent, and
Oh, actually, the Duke of Lorraine and the Duke of Brittany played both sides of the fence in this conflict. They were not particularly noble, you know. When it was going well with the French, they may send a few troops to help. When it was going well for the English, they kind of stayed at home and kept a quiet profile. They were not particularly honorable in this case.
was he the mayor of Jerusalem during the
No,
Crusades?
that was not he, it was one of his ancestors.
I see.
Yes,
Is there a book or a movie that you would recommend to explore Joan's story a little bit more?
There are lots of books.
there are a lot of movies that you can watch on Joan of Arc.
You might comment, we got some of the images from a movie.
We got some of the images from a movie that we had seen.
There used
But there is, yeah, there is a very recent movie, so Google it, I'm sure you can. But
Netflix it.
Netflix it.
And Jackie, if Joan never had any children, and her brother's line stopped, according to that, how do we get Clotilde?
Well, no, it didn't stop. It didn't have any boys.
I see.
And what would happen sometime in noble French family is that the girls would get to attach their name to their husband's name and hyphenate it. And then this way the name would not die. The line would not die.
So they were never Delis, because you said they got
Yes,
ennobled.
it was Delis for a little bit, but during the French Revolution, they had to keep a much lower profile because if you were an aristocrat, you would get guillotined. So they may just have dropped the Delis for a while and picked it up later.
Did Joan carry a weapon when she was leading troops?
No, she only carried a standard
Yeah,
with
banner.
a banner with 3 fleur-de-lis. That's it. No weapon.
She was a holy person and she was deemed a saint. How is it believed that she was also a soldier in the war? How is that explained or understood?
Well, because she led the troop.
She was out front.
She was in front. And she was well respected by her companion of arms. Well,
Do you think it might also, this notion that she treated the wounded of the other side, that she was out there, not in well, leading her troops, but she was also had empathy for the other side, and that might account for why the church decided she was a saint.
and think about it, she was wounded twice. In Orléans and in Paris. And, you know, she had to be very close to the convent in order to be wounded.
As a teenager also, can you imagine that?
Repeat the
We can
question.
consider her a soldier, you know, even though she didn't carry a sword.
This is just a little thing that happened to me. I was in January of 1991 in France and all over, and wound up in a little village where she was Christian in or chapel or whatever it was. And I went through there, and there was a horrible storm coming in over from the Atlantic, and the roofs tops are so high, and the tile was just bouncing everywhere. I thought, this place is haunted. She was Christian there to be a soldier, I think. But anyway, that's my.
Where was it in France?
I'm sorry?
Do you remember where it was in France?
Well, none of us, there was 4 of us together, and we could not pronounce the name of the So, it was a small town, but it had a nice
How do you spell it?
courtyard. And, yeah, so anyway, that was quite an experience for me, because I thought, oh, this is haunted in here. But enjoyed it.
Thank you.
We'll get it up and Jacob can have it up and we'll also.
Can't hear you.
Yes.
So, you've recorded this, so hopefully Jacob will be able to get it up to 897, and I'll send the link so you can find it on YouTube. And then we'll all, look forward to hearing from Luella, same time, 28 days from now. Thanks everybody for coming.
Aren't you guys hooked up?
It's